Live breaking news from News Channel 3.
I'm Beth Farnsworth in the News Channel 3 studio. We have breaking news out of downtown Santa Barbara.
Protesters, they're in support of what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. They actually started at the courthouse. They've made their way down Carrillo. They're trying to get to the 101 freeway is what it sounds like. Police have moved in. They've closed off many of the streets. And we do understand that Santa Barbara Police, the SWAT team, has now moved in.
And we're also being told that the CHP officers also being called in. Sheriff's deputies also being called in. And this was a protest that began within the past hour or so. A group that gathered in front of the Santa Barbara Historic Courthouse, and from that area marched down to Carrillo. From there, heading over toward the 101 freeway.
And if you're watching News Channel 3 at 6:30, we did interview one of the protesters at the courthouse maybe 45 minutes before this whole thing started.
Martine Leva, one of the organizers of this, and calling for a peaceful protest in Santa Barbara. We do have Captain Riley Harwood with the Santa Barbara Police Department on the phone. Riley, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, what can you tell us from your perspective?
Well, it would appear that a group of protesters that started at about 6 o'clock this evening at the courthouse went mobile from that location and ultimately headed down Carrillo Street toward the Highway 101. Our department's posture has always been to try and help facilitate peaceful protests. And we started by trying to help stop traffic so protesters could march and make their voices heard and exercise their First Amendment rights. However, it seems that some of the group has tried to march toward the freeway, apparently in an effort maybe to get up onto the freeway and block it, and that is something that we are not going to allow. And so we have police officers at that scene in the process of preventing them from getting onto the freeway.
You mentioned that the CHP has been called in. So are they going to set up in certain locations along the freeway to also try and stop these protesters from getting onto the actual freeway?
Yes, CJ, that's correct. I mean, the CHP's primary responsibility is the freeway and to make sure that it stays open to traffic. Protesters getting onto the freeway in a time of darkness is just extremely dangerous, and it's not something that we can permit.
And of course, the freeway is so backed up with the holiday traffic, as you can see. We've got, I don't know if you can see, but we can see from TV Hill, and we've got this shot that we're looking at. How many protesters do you estimate have gathered?
I don't have an estimate. I'm not at the scene at the moment.
A quick question. You talked about whether or not they've been peaceful. Have they been peaceful? Have there been any problems along the way? I know they're trying to make their way to the freeway, but any problems other than that along the way?
Initially, no. I did not hear of any problems when the crowd was gathered at the courthouse. And initially, when they started marching, our traffic officers were assisting them with rolling closures to ensure that protesters did not get involved in any accidents with motor vehicles on the roadway. However, it appears that some, if not all, of the group that were initially marching decided to take a turn toward the 101, and that's just something that we're not going to allow. In the past, that has been, if you recall, sometimes during the war protests that we had a few years back, that happened on at least one occasion where protesters tried to get up onto the freeway, and that's just not something that we are going to permit to happen.
Okay, Riley, we have a really good sky cam shot right now of the traffic heading down Carrillo. Are there other streets that they're trying to get to try to reach the freeway as well?
I have not heard of any significant effort to get onto the freeway other than at that location.
Did you guys anticipate that something like this could happen? I would imagine after watching what's been going on around the country, last night we watched protesters block the freeway, the 110 freeway in downtown Los Angeles, the 580 freeway in Oakland. Any anticipation that something like this could happen here?
Well, CJ, we certainly anticipated protest activity happening. As you know, we have a long tradition of protest activity taking place in Santa Barbara. We had protests almost every Saturday for quite some time at the height of the Iraq War. And we at the police department are very adept at helping facilitate First Amendment activities. That's a tradition that we're actually very proud of. However, we do have a responsibility to protect our citizens and the property here in Santa Barbara, and we're not going to tolerate people breaking the law. That exceeds anyone's First Amendment right to expression or assembly.
Sergeant Harwood, I just got word from Victoria Sanchez. Westbound Carrillo at State Street, barricades are being set up. She's making calls as well. Are you seeing or hearing from your people more of this activity along State Street, up and down?
I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing the question there.
Curious if you're seeing this, then if it's not going to, if you've got the barricades being set up now, westbound Carrillo at State Street, curious if you're hearing perhaps that the protesters are going to be marching down State Street instead.
I haven't heard that they are going to do so. That would actually be something that we would prefer, not in the sense of a riotous situation, but if folks wanted to peacefully protest by marching down State Street, we would have the resources to help facilitate that in a safe manner. That is always our preference, and we understand that we have a responsibility to help people, to protect people's constitutional rights, and we have a long tradition of helping protesters in this community exercise their First Amendment rights to assembly and free speech. And we were more than happy to do that again in this instance. However, we will not tolerate violent, riotous behavior. We have a responsibility to protect the property and citizens of Santa Barbara, and we will do that.
We've been hearing that SWAT team has been called in, and officers are gearing up. Sounds like full riot gear. They got the shields. Tell us, when they're actually implemented, what is their goal going to be? What are they going to try and do through this whole process to keep things peaceful and maybe direct these protesters in the right direction?
Well, it's not. Our SWAT officers and other specialty officers are being utilized, but they're not being utilized in a SWAT capacity. They are being utilized just like, in most cases, just like all the other officers that we have to do crowd control duties. Now, some of our SWAT officers are specially trained to utilize non-lethal weapons, and those officers will be available to employ those, such as tear gas or pepper balls, if that's necessary.
Which we certainly hope it doesn't ever get to that point, but it's nice to know that if they're going to get suited up with that full-blown riot gear and the helmets and all that, that what their role will be if they're needed. So.
And Sergeant, you said that in essence, if it goes in this way, that the police would be willing to almost escort these marchers, down State Street, somewhere else, for a peaceful protest, if it came to that instead.
Yes, Beth, we would do that. We have done that on numerous occasions, and we are well practiced at doing that very thing. In fact, when the protesters in this instance left the courthouse and started marching on the street, that is exactly what we started doing for them. But when the tone changed and people started marching toward the freeway in an apparent attempt to try and disrupt traffic, it became apparent that this was crossing the line into illegal behavior.
I do remember you brought up some of the anti-war protests that we saw. Like I think you said, it was almost every weekend for months. I don't remember any of those protests really getting out of hand. It sounded like everybody was pretty civil. Everybody stayed. Nothing got too out of hand. Is that correct?
By and large, that is correct. We did have occasional instances, particularly involving folks that were from outside of the community, that either came from LA or from the university or elsewhere, folks that really didn't have a stake in the welfare of the city of Santa Barbara, that came in and really tried to agitate things. So we had a few problems dealing with folks like that on occasion during those protests. But by and large, we were able to establish a good relationship with protest leaders, and for a long time, on a weekly basis, help them facilitate marches up and down State Street.
Okay, Sergeant Riley Harwood, I'm going to ask you to stand by for just a moment if you would. We have a reporter, Tracy Lair, out there live and want to check in with her. Tracy, what can you tell us?
Beth, this began as an impromptu march. It all started at the Santa Barbara County Courthouse, and we were told that they weren't planning to march, and then they decided to, and they took their walk onto State Street and were pretty much blocking it. And then officers from the police department, the sheriff's department, and even the SWAT team noticed them heading this way. This is Carrillo and the 101, and they now have a barricade line up, and they also have SWAT standing by, that Santa Barbara Police SWAT team. They have blocked off every entrance and exit to the freeway, and they're redirecting traffic, which you can imagine is very busy for people trying to get home coming down Carrillo. Some people are getting on the South 101, but all the other entrances to and exits to the 101 are closed right now. Again, we're on Carrillo and the 101, and this began as a peaceful action out at the Santa Barbara County Courthouse in the wake of the Ferguson decision from the grand jury not to charge the officer accused of killing Michael Brown. They, at the last minute, decided to march after their moment of silence, and that was more than 100 people, many of them carrying signs. Some of those signs said that black people matter.
Tracy, can you give us an estimate as to how many protesters gathered for this?
It was definitely more than 100. We were trying to get those estimates, and they were saying close, but somewhere between 100 and 200. But the march did, happen just as an impromptu march, and they had a megaphone, and they were walking towards State Street. And at one point, it was such a big group that it would have blocked the street, just crossing the street. And then we're told that they started heading this way, and we saw all of the officers stage at every freeway entrance, because in other cities they were concerned about people blocking freeways. They were saying last night that was happening in some of the major cities in the U.S. in the wake of the Ferguson unrest.
Tracy, are you actually seeing any protesters actually trying to get up onto the freeway? And if so, what has happened to them?
I'm not. At one point, we could see their signs coming down Carrillo, and right now you can see officers lining up from one side of Carrillo to the other side, right at the northbound or southbound entrance to the Carrillo underpass. They also have their Santa Barbara Police SWAT team out, and they're just waiting in case they do come this way. You can hear those protesters. They were chanting and marching earlier, and I'm not hearing them right now, so they might have turned back, but police are not going to let them come this way and get on this freeway.
I was going to ask you, Tracy, what were they chanting?
I also hear police dogs out here.
You don't? Okay. What were they chanting?
They were chanting things in support of Michael Brown, and that that black people matter. Also, they were talking about hush, like do something. And in some points, they had their hands up. That was a big part of the protest that started with the march at UCSB. And some of the people in this crowd are students. There's students from UCSB, and they're members of the community. And they seem to be all ages and from all walks of life, including clergy. But again, they talked about it being a peaceful action at the courthouse. And then at the last minute, they decided to march, and it did get a little rowdy. You could definitely hear them walking. But I'm not seeing the marchers now, and they are still trying to direct traffic away from Carrillo in case they do head this way. But earlier we did see some of their signs.
We see so much law enforcement. We also understand that the sheriff's Bearcat, the armored vehicle, also called in.
Tracy, just a quick question.
That's right.
A quick question. Have you seen anybody get out of hand through this whole thing? Other than just chanting and yelling, anybody else get out of hand?
I didn't, but I did see some of the Twitter photos after they left the courthouse and were walking across the street. They were taking up all of State Street. It's that big of a group. And some of them had candles, but there wasn't much lights, and they had the posters and the megaphone. So it could be extremely dangerous because there's so many cars out here, and you can't see them that well unless they're chanting. And again, it looked like they might be headed to the freeway, so they were planning for the worst and hoping for the best here. And they do have all these officers out making sure that nothing else happens.
Okay, Tracy Lair, we will be going back to you as well. Sergeant Riley Harwood with the Santa Barbara Police Department. You're still on the phone?
I am.
Hi. Any other developments since we left you to talk to Tracy?
No. From watching what I see on Key News, it appears that the situation has become somewhat more stable than it was initially. I can tell you that at the very outset of protesters arriving close to the freeway, there was at least one individual that displayed some assaultive behavior toward the officers that were there. I don't know if that person was subsequently arrested, but there was at least one individual there that wanted to fight with officers.
Tracy Lair thought that possibly the protesters turned around when they saw the officers lined up right before they got to the freeway. Have you heard anything about that? If people have started turning around and heading back towards State Street?
I haven't heard anything further since I've been on the phone with you. I haven't been able to monitor the radio closely. However, that would have been the response that we would have hoped for in this situation.
Okay, Sergeant Riley Harwood, thank you, and we will be back in touch with you throughout the evening as needed.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, we've been monitoring the situation down in downtown Santa Barbara. Again, the protesters started at the Santa Barbara County Courthouse. We talked to some of them live at 6:30. Everything seemed really calm and serene down at the courthouse. And then right after that, they all started marching down State Street, right in the middle of the road, then started making their way down Carrillo toward the freeway. And that's when police moved in. They mobilized to do whatever they could to stop the protesters from ever making it to the freeway. And as far as we know, nobody's made it onto the freeway yet.
And really because of the mass number of people who gathered and because of the direction heading toward the freeway in an attempt, it seems, to block the freeway. And of course, we have these shots of the S-curve, holiday traffic, bumper to bumper along. You can see, especially in the southbound lanes, traffic flowing a little bit better right now than it was earlier, but not something that the police officers are going to even let might happen. It's just not going to happen. They are not going to allow those protesters to get anywhere near the freeway.
And by the way, the other thing, too, we haven't really talked about it here, with a lot of those side streets closed off of Carrillo, traffic is an absolute nightmare in the downtown area. And as you can see, the southbound lanes of the 101 are backed up as well. So if you're trying to move about in downtown Santa Barbara, you may want to avoid getting even close to this area.
You know, a lot of people having family coming in early, a couple days early before Thanksgiving, and that's going to add to the chaos as well. People wanting to go out and have dinner in the restaurants downtown. So again, just be aware of the situation that is unfolding right now downtown Santa Barbara, Carrillo off of State Street, because of this protest in solidarity with what's been happening in Ferguson.
Stay tuned to News Channel 3. We're going to keep an eye on the situation there. We will break in. Don't forget, you can also get the latest information on what's happening on our website at KEYT.com.
Orchard, I need some great gift ideas.